21 stories above the floor of an Illinois coal pit, a welder named Gary Andrews stood on the very top of a burning machine, watching a crane try to reach him and fail. Below him, the largest land machine ever built was on fire, fed by 8,000 gallons of its own hydraulic oil, and 7 fire departments could do nothing but watch it burn. By morning, it would be a total loss. $35 million, gone in a single night. This is the story of the Captain and how 4 men lost the greatest digging machine the world has ever seen. To understand how a machine this enormous could die in a matter of hours, we have to go back 28 years to a problem buried in the ground near Cutler, Illinois. A problem that no machine on Earth could solve. Over the next half hour, we are going to walk through all of it. How they built it, the 26 years it ruled the pit, the night it burned, and what was left when the smoke finally cleared. Stay with us, because the ending is not the one most people expect. The problem was the coal itself. Beneath the farmland of Perry County lay not one seam of coal, but 2, stacked almost on top of each other, with the upper seam sitting about 50 feet above the lower one. Mining one seam was ordinary work. Mining both at once, in a single pass, was something no equipment in existence could do. You could send in smaller machines and work the seams separately, but that was slow, and slow meant expensive. The men who ran Southwestern Illinois Coal wanted something better. They wanted one machine that could strip the dirt off both seams in one motion and never stop moving. So they went to the one company on Earth that might build it. Marion Power Shovel of Marion, Ohio. If you have watched our videos on the machines that built the Hoover Dam or the men who carved the Panama Canal, you already know the name Marion. This was a company that had been building giants since 1884, back when it was called the Marion Steam Shovel Company. Marion shovels dug the Panama Canal. Marion machines worked the Hoover Dam. When America needed to move something that nobody else could move, Marion was the answer. And by the 1960s, Marion was in a quiet war with another company, Bucyrus Erie, over who could build the biggest stripping machine in the world. Each new machine was larger than the last. The Mountaineer, the Big Digger, each one a record, each one beaten within a few years. What Southwestern Illinois Coal asked for would end that race. They wanted the largest one ever built. Marion's engineers designed a stripping shovel unlike anything that had come before. We should pause here on that word, shovel, because it matters, and the people who know these machines will tell you it matters. A stripping shovel is not a drag line. A drag line throws its bucket out on cables and drags it back along the ground. A shovel does the opposite. It carries a rigid bucket on a steel arm, crowds it forward into the bank of earth, and forces the teeth into the dirt by raw power. Marion built shovels, and the shovel they designed for Illinois would be the largest the world had ever seen, or would ever see again. They called the design the 6360. The men who would come to love it called it the Captain. The name came from a man, Captain Thomas Clinton Mullins, who earned his rank as an officer in the 34th Engineers of the United States Army during the First World War, serving more than a year in France. He was a University of Arkansas engineer who became one of the most important coal men in the Midwest. The mine was named for him, and so was the machine, named by a relative, W.E. Mullins, known to everyone as Bill, who ran Southwestern Illinois Coal and who opened the Captain Mine in 1964. At the time, it was the largest surface coal mine east of the Mississippi River. Now, the numbers on this machine are difficult to believe, even when you are standing in front of the photographs. The Captain weighed roughly 15,000 tons. Its boom rose more than 200 feet into the air, higher than a 20-story building. The bucket at the end, what these men called the dipper, could hold 180 cubic yards of earth in a single bite. That is around 300 tons of dirt and rock in one scoop. The dipper was so large that it needed 2 doors on the bottom to dump its load, and each of those doors alone weighed 15 tons. No other shovel ever built had 2 dipper doors. It was the only one. And here is the detail that we think makes this machine truly extraordinary. We spent weeks digging into this story, and this is the part that stopped us cold. The captain was so tall and so wide that loaders and haul trucks could drive underneath it while it was working. A machine with enough room beneath its own body for other heavy equipment to operate. It stood on 8 massive crawler tracks, arranged in pairs at its 4 corners, each one 45 feet long and 16 feet high. A single track shoe weighed 3.5 tons. The captain did not run on diesel. It ran on electricity, and a staggering amount of it. The machine was fed 14,000 volts of power through a trailing cable, and inside its body, that power was converted to drive 20 main motors, producing around 30,000 horsepower. It drank enough electricity to supply a town of 30,000 people. When the captain was working, somewhere a power plant was working harder because of it. And now, the fact that connects this Illinois coal pit to something most people would never imagine. The same 8-crawler design that Marion engineered for its giant shovels became the basis for the machines that carried America's rockets to the launch pad. Marion Power Shovel built the 2 crawler transporters that moved the Saturn V rocket, and later the Space Shuttle, from the assembly building to the launch site at Cape Canaveral. They cost $14 million each. The technology that carried Apollo to the edge of space and the technology under the captain in an Illinois cornfield came from the same drawing boards, in the same town, at the same time. If a detail like that is why you are still here, hit that like button and subscribe if you have not already, because we dig into one forgotten machine like this every week. It genuinely helps us keep making these. The whole machine cost $25 million to build in 1965. To put that in perspective, that same year, with that same money, you could have built Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. They spent the price of a casino on a single shovel. Assembling it was its own enormous task. You do not ship a 15,000-ton machine in one piece. The components were fabricated in the Marion plant in Ohio, then taken apart again and loaded onto rail cars for the long haul down to southern Illinois. There, on a prepared foundation beside the pit, crews began the slow work of putting the giant back together, piece by piece, rivet by rivet, raising the body, stacking the crawlers, threading miles of cable through the structure. Field erection alone took 10 months. 10 months of men crawling over a skeleton of steel just to assemble the machine before it ever moved a single yard of dirt. It helps to understand exactly how a stripping shovel like this actually works, because the cycle is the whole point of the machine. It is 4 motions, over and over, thousands of times a shift. First, the crowd, where the operator drives the dipper forward on its great steel arm and forces the teeth into the wall of earth in front of it. Then the hoist, where 4 steel ropes, each 3.5 inches thick, haul the loaded dipper up through the cut, tearing 300 tons of dirt and rock loose in one motion. Then the swing, where the whole upper body of the machine rotates, carrying that load out over the worked ground. And then the dump, where those 2 15-ton doors on the bottom of the dipper drop open and let the earth fall away into the pit behind. Crowd, hoist, swing, dump. A cycle that smaller machines did with a few tons. The captain did it with 300, and it did it in under a minute. And then, on October 15th, 1965, The captain powered up, swung its great boom, and began to dig. For the next 26 years, the captain was untouchable. Here is something that surprises almost everyone who learns this story. This 15,000-ton machine, the largest moving object on land, was run by a crew of just 4 men per shift. 1 operator in the cab, working the controls. 1 oiler, moving through the machine, keeping its gears and bearings greased. 1 welder, ready to repair the structure wherever steel cracked or wore. And 1 ground man down below, tending the heavy trailing cables and running a wheel loader to clear away loose rock. 4 men, that was it. 4 men ran the greatest digging machine in the world, around the clock, in 3 shifts a day. The operator who would later become the voice of this machine's final hours was a man named Gene Miller. By his account, on a normal day, the captain moved more than 7,000 cubic yards of earth every single hour. It could strip a pit a full mile long, end to end, in about 10 days. To understand how fast that is, when the captain was finally gone and a smaller shovel took over the same work, a job that the captain did in 5 days took the replacement 11. Think about what a shift in that cab was actually like. You sat more than 100 feet up, working levers that controlled 30,000 horsepower, and every time you pulled 300 tons out of the ground, the entire machine shuddered around you. You could pick up a telephone in the cab and call 9 different stations spread across the body of the machine. You could speak to the men on the ground through a loudspeaker. There was an elevator inside the machine, 8 stories of it, to move between the lower frame and the machinery deck up top, because you could not simply walk from one end of the captain to the other. The men who ran it were not just operators. They lived inside a building that dug coal. Over its working life, the numbers piled up into something almost meaningless in scale. The captain moved 809 million cubic yards of overburden. That is more earth moved by a single machine than any other shovel or drag line in the history of the world. Not the most for its year. The most ever. It did not work alone. Beside it, in the same pit, ran another monster, a Bucyrus Erie bucket wheel excavator, a machine nearly 700 feet long with a digging wheel 40 feet across. Picture that for a second. A wheel as tall as a 4-story building, rimmed with buckets, spinning slowly as it chewed into the earth, mounted on a machine longer than 2 football fields, laid end to end. Where the captain bit the ground in great single scoops, the bucket wheel sliced it away in a continuous ribbon. When the coal seam dropped too deep for even the captain to reach efficiently, the bucket wheel would pre-strip the upper layers so the shovel could get at what was below. At its peak, the Captain Mine ran multiple giants at once, several stripping shovels, walking drag lines, and bucket wheels, all working the same ground, all within sight of each other. If you have seen our videos on the great scraper builders like Le Tourneau, you understand this era. This was the golden age of moving earth by sheer mechanical force, and the captain was its king. The mine fed a steady river of coal out to the country, around 150 railroad cars every day, roughly 6 million tons a year. The coal it dug was Illinois Basin coal, from the famous Heron No. 6 seam, the richest coal seam in the state. Whole towns lived and breathed by this mine. Cutler, Percy, Piatt's. The paychecks that built those communities came up out of that pit, lifted by that machine. But there was a shadow growing over all of it, and it had nothing to do with the machine. Illinois coal is high in sulfur, and in the 1970s and the 1980s, as America passed tougher and tougher clean air laws, power plants began to turn away from high-sulfur eastern coal toward the cleaner, low-sulfur coal coming out of Wyoming. The captain could outdig anything on Earth. What it could not do was change the chemistry of the coal beneath it. Slowly, quietly, the economic ground was shifting under the largest machine in the world. By 1991, the captain had been working for 26 years. It had been bought and sold along with the mine, ending up under the Arch Mineral Company, which had repainted the giant in red, white, and blue. The men who ran it knew it the way you know an old house, every sound, every smell, every quirk. Gene Miller had spent years in its cab. To him it was not a machine. It was, in his own words, a wonderful machine, and nothing could touch her when it came to production. On the evening of September 9th, 1991, Gene Miller climbed into the cab for the afternoon shift, the one that ran from 4 in the afternoon until midnight. It was a shift like 10,000 before it. The boom swung. The dipper bit into the earth, 300 tons at a time, the way it always had. And then, a little after 7 o'clock, Gene Miller smelled something burning. At first, he was not alarmed. When you run a machine with 20 motors and miles of wiring and thousands of gallons of oil moving through it, a strange smell is not automatically a crisis. As Miller himself put it, that kind of smell could have come from a variety of sources. A brake shoe sticking, an overheated bearing on a shaft, an electrical fault somewhere in the system. So he did what any experienced operator would do. He stopped the machine, and he went looking. He checked the house first, the main body where the machinery lived. Nothing obvious. Then he noticed it. Smoke rising up from the lower works, the great steel base the machine stood on. He went down to investigate, and there he found it. Hydraulic oil burning in the lower frame. Now we need to understand what the captain was carrying inside its own body, because this is the part that turned a fire into a catastrophe. To level itself and steer those 8 crawler tracks, the machine used hydraulic systems holding around 8,000 gallons of oil. On top of that, it carried a 1,000-gallon diesel tank and another 1,000 gallons of solvent stored in drums. The largest machine in the world was sitting on top of its own fuel supply, 10,000 gallons of material that wanted to burn. If you are as gripped by this as we were when we found it, hit that subscribe button before we go on, because what these 4 men did next is the reason we wanted to tell this story in the first place. Miller, along with his oiler Fred Kruger and his welder Gary Andrews, went after the fire the way crews always did, with the heavy, dry chemical extinguishers staged around the machine. The 20-pound units kept on board for exactly this. They emptied them into the flames. But the fire was feeding on oil, and oil does not care about a handful of extinguishers. The flames kept climbing the lower frame. They ran out of extinguishers, and the fire was winning. Miller got on the radio to the mine office. Gary Andrews went up, into the body of the machine, to bring down more extinguishers from the upper levels. The mine had its own small fire trucks, little units carrying a couple hundred pounds of dry chemical. They were no match for what was happening. By the time the scale of it became clear, the fire was raging around the lower frame, about 30 feet above the ground. At 9:44 that night, the mine office finally called the Cutler Fire Protection District. The chief, Larry Bennett, responded, took one look, and started calling for help from everyone within reach. Before the night was over, fire departments from Pinckneyville, Percy, Campbell Hill, Steelville, Coulterville, DuQuoin, and Sparta would all be on the scene. 7 departments, converging on a single burning machine in the dark. And for the first half hour, it was chaos. Imagine arriving at this thing in the dark. A burning machine the height of a 20-story building, in the middle of an open coal pit, with no street, No hydrant, no clear way in. Mine workers were shouting directions, and the directions did not agree with each other. Nobody quite knew who was in charge. One mine foreman, trying to move through the dark and the smoke, drove his truck right off the edge of the coal seam and rolled it. He climbed out unhurt, but it tells you how confused those first minutes were. It was not until the crews set up a command post inside the Steelville Department's emergency vehicle that the response finally pulled itself together into something organized. But while the crews below were still finding their footing, the most dangerous part of this whole night was already happening, far above their heads. Chief Bennett later described what he saw in a way nobody who heard it ever forgot. The fire, he said, looked like a giant gas stove burner, with the largest pot you have ever seen sitting on top of it. But up inside that pot, the situation had become a matter of life and death. Gary Andrews had made 3 separate trips up the elevator to the roof of the machine, carrying fire extinguishers down each time. On that 3rd trip, everything changed. The smoke turned thick and black, pouring up through the elevator shaft, the one path back down. And then the machine's electrical system shut off. Here is the small mercy in this story. The elevator was electric. If the power had failed while Gary Andrews was inside it, he would have been trapped in a steel box filling with smoke. Instead, the power died after he had already stepped out onto the roof. He was alive, but he was now stranded 21 stories up on top of a burning machine with no way down. They tried to reach him. The first aerial ladder brought to the scene was far too short, not even close to the height of the machine. Then they brought in a rough terrain crane fitted with a man basket, the kind of basket you put a worker in to lift them up to height. It reached and could not get to him. The heat coming up through the structure was becoming unbearable. Andrews did the only thing left to do. He climbed even higher, up to the very top of the gantry, the highest point on the whole machine, just to get away from the heat rising beneath him. Down below, Gene Miller was not going to let his welder die up there. There was a cable, a 2-inch steel suspension cable that ran from the top of the gantry, where Andrews now stood, out along the length of the great boom. Miller talked Andrews through it over the radio. They got a safety harness on him, clipped to that cable, and Andrews began to work his way out along it, hand over hand, unclipping and reclipping past each block that held the cable in place, moving out over open air toward the boom. The boom of the captain reached more than 200 feet up. 21 stories above the ground, a man in a harness inched along a steel cable away from the flames, toward the only path that might save him. When he finally reached the boom itself, he climbed down its steps until the man basket could finally get to him and bring him down. Fred Kruger, the oiler, had gone up the boom as well and was brought down the same way. And then Gene Miller. All of them down. All of them alive. We want to be very clear about this because it is the heart of the whole story, and it is the part most people get wrong when they hear about a fire this size. Not one person died that night. Not one person was even seriously injured. Even when a mine foreman, driving in the dark and the chaos, drove his truck right off the edge of the coal seam and rolled it, he climbed out unharmed. 7 fire departments, a machine the size of a building burning for hours, a man stranded 21 stories in the air, and every single human being walked away. The men were saved. It was the machine that was dying, and it died hard. For the first half hour after Chief Bennett arrived, there was confusion. Mine workers shouting conflicting directions, nobody quite in charge, until a command post was set up in the Steelville Department's emergency vehicle and order took hold. The fire was nearly beaten by 2 in the morning, and then the heat did something cruel. It melted the seals in the swing gear cases deep in the machine, and fresh oil leaked out and found the heat, and the whole thing reignited. The captain burned for 3 more hours. It was not until around 5 o'clock in the morning, after roughly 10 hours of fire, that the flames were finally fully out. We are most of the way through this story now, and the men were safe. The machine was not. If you have stayed with us this far, you already know this is your kind of channel. So take 1 second to subscribe so the next forgotten giant finds you. Because what happened in the daylight, when they finally got a good look at what was left of the captain, is the part that decided its fate. And it had nothing to do with the fire. When the sun came up on September 10th, 1991, Gene Miller looked at the machine from a distance, and his heart lifted a little. Because from far away, it looked almost normal. The lower house was blackened. Some steel panels were gone, but the cab was intact. The great boom still reached into the sky, and the machinery house up top looked like it had only taken smoke. Standing back from it, you could almost believe the captain had survived. They believed it enough to start. A repair project was begun. The plan was to bring the giant back to life. Then they looked closer, and 2 things ended it. The first was hidden in the steel. When inspectors examined the main revolving frame, the great platform the entire upper machine turned on, they found a crack. Not a small one. A crack running side to side through a steel floor plate 5 inches thick. The likely cause was the firefighting itself, the water cannons hitting steel that had been heated for hours, the sudden cooling cracking the metal. The fire had not just burned the machine, it had broken its back. The second thing was simpler and colder. It was a business decision. Arch Mineral already had another machine sitting idle, a Marion 5900 stripping shovel parked over at the nearby Leahy mine, a property the company had taken over a few years earlier. It was smaller than the captain, but it ran, and it was available now. And the entire pit, the bucket wheel excavator, the drills, the loaders, the dozers, all of it depended on having an overburdened machine working. They could not wait. So they sent Gene Miller, the man who had just watched the captain burn, over to the Leahy mine to wake up the 5900 and walk it back to take the captain's place. The math sealed it. Marion Power Shovel estimated the repair would cost around $7 million. The machine was insured by Lloyd's of London, and Arch Mineral chose to take the insurance payout instead. $35 million. They collected 5 times the cost of the repair, and let the largest machine ever built be declared a total loss. There is something quietly cruel in what came next for the men. Gene Miller, the operator who had run the captain for years, who had smelled the first wisp of smoke and stayed on that machine talking his welder down off the gantry, was the same man sent to revive the replacement. He went to Leahy, woke the 5900, and walked it back to the very pit where the captain had burned. Day after day, he climbed into a smaller cab to do the same job at less than half the pace, in the shadow of where the giant had stood. He never lost his affection for the machine he had lost. The men kept working, because that is what coal men did. The mine still needed dirt moved, and dirt does not wait for anyone to grieve. The captain was scrapped in 1992. The contract went to United Salvage Company of Illinois, and they cut it apart in the last pit it had ever dug. Think about what that work involved. The same machine that took 10 months and crews of men to assemble now had to be taken back down, in reverse. Except this time, nobody was being careful with the pieces. Torches cut through steel that had been engineered to last a century. The 8 crawlers, the great boom, the body that had held 300 tons in a single bite, all of it reduced to scrap and hauled away on the same kind of rail cars that had once carried its coal. The smaller 5,900 that replaced it needed 11 days to do what the captain did in 5 days. The greatest digging machine in history was taken apart for scrap steel, not because it could not work, but because a piece of paper made it worth more dead than alive. And the towns felt it, not all at once, but steadily. The Captain Mine eventually closed as the high-sulfur coal lost its market to the cleaner coal out west, exactly as that shadow had threatened for years. Cutler, Percy, Piatt's, all those communities that had been built around the mine, slowly lost the thing that had given them work. Across southern Illinois coal country, the same story played out town after town. The mines were the reason the towns existed, and when the mines went quiet, there was often nothing left to replace them. Around 16,000 acres of the old Captain Mine land was eventually turned over to the state of Illinois as reclaimed ground, the pits filled and shaped back into something green. You could stand on that grass today and never know that the largest machine on Earth once rolled across it. Here is what makes the Captain different from the other giants you might know. Big Brutus, the great shovel in Kansas, still stands today as a museum, the largest electric shovel left on Earth that you can walk up to and touch. Big Muskie, the enormous dragline in Ohio, was scrapped, but its people fought to save its bucket, and that bucket sits in a memorial park where you can still stand inside it. The Silver Spade, the last working stripping shovel in America, ran until 2006 before it too was cut up. Even the machines that died left something for people to remember them by. Almost every one of these legends left something behind. A museum, a monument, a bucket in a park. The Captain left almost nothing. The greatest of them all was cut into pieces and hauled away, and when it was gone, it was simply gone. Almost, because one thing did survive that night. The flag. The American flag that the Captain was flying from its gantry on the day it burned came through the fire, and it was kept. A single scorched flag, reportedly held at the company's offices, the last surviving piece of the largest land machine the world has ever built. We have told a lot of stories on this channel about the machines that built America. The shovels that dug the Hoover Dam, the men who carved the Panama Canal, the scrapers and drag lines that moved mountains so that highways and dams and cities could exist. Almost every one of those stories ends with a structure still standing, a dam, a bridge, a canal, a monument to what the machines accomplished. The Captain's story ends differently. The thing it built was not a single dam or a single bridge. It was the daily power of an entire region, 6 million tons of coal a year, the electricity in millions of homes, the work that fed a dozen towns. You cannot photograph that the way you can photograph the Hoover Dam. It went up the smokestacks and into the power lines and disappeared into ordinary American life. And when the machine that made it possible burned down in a single September night, the men who loved it could only stand back and watch, and then go back to work. That is the strange truth about the Captain. We did not lose any men that night. We lost the machine. And in the end, the largest machine ever built by human hands left behind nothing you can visit, nothing you can climb, nothing you can stand inside. Just a burnt flag, a handful of photographs, and the memory of 4 men who ran a giant. If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe and stick with us. Every week we go looking for another forgotten giant, and we promise you, there are more of them out there than you would ever believe. We will see you in the next one.